Good evening, and welcome to AFI's 100 Years, 100 Stars. Tonight, we celebrate those men and women.
Charles Boyer invests in real estate. Fred McMurray buys cattle.
It wasn't just a bad time, it was a gilded nightmare. Hollywood, a paradise for millions, was a closed-off hell for Shirley Temple, the curly-haired angel who once made America smile. But behind those smiles were tears, blood, and screams buried in silence. At 85, before she passed away, she left behind a trembling handwritten letter, exposing 5 names that were once hailed as legends. But to Shirley, they were monsters in the guise of fame. One forced her to perform a sex scene when she was just 7. Another mixed alcohol into her orange juice. And the last? He sold her like nothing more than a commodity. Are you ready to know the truth? These shocks will forever change the way you view Hollywood. Don't forget to spread the truth and subscribe so you don't miss the shocking sequel, because the truth is just beginning to be revealed.
Would be cut out of the movie for the South. Now, of course, that was all pre-civil rights, so.
Shirley Temple, America's curly-haired angel, was born on April 23, 1928, in Santa Monica, California, and was once hailed as the child who saved Hollywood from the darkness of the Great Depression. But behind the flowing dresses and sunny smile was a brutal truth. At age 3, Shirley was put on stage as a singing puppet. By age 6, she was a box office queen, earning more than President Roosevelt, but no one asked her if she was happy. Shirley's childhood was a gilded circus, where children's smiles were for sale every second. At age 12, during a seemingly normal meeting, a powerful producer asked her to sit on his lap, accompanied by sickeningly disgusting words. She refused, and the price was the beginning of her career's demise. At 13, Hollywood turned its back. They stripped away her innocence on screen, scrutinizing every pubescent curve with eyes no longer of an audience but of a predator. One director once threw a chair against a wall because she couldn't cry real enough for him. And then they concluded coldly, when it's not cute anymore, it's not worth it. Everyone thought Shirley lived in a fairy tale, but in truth, that fairy tale was a gilded trap. In the early 1960s, she chose to leave the spotlight and plunge into politics, becoming the US ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia. But the past did not spare her, it was a haunting ghost. At age 85, in a haunting private interview, Shirley looked straight into the camera and named 5 men she had once considered untouchable. I don't forgive. And I will never forget. It wasn't a confession, it was the final indictment of a child betrayed by Hollywood. He is an irreplaceable symbol of America, John Wayne, the man with the gun of justice who walked straight into the hearts of audiences with the swagger of the Wild West. But few people expected that this cowboy hero once made a 10-year-old girl cry right on the set, with just one chilling shout. In 1947, a war movie was started with great expectations. Shirley Temple, now a teenager, was cast as the rebellious daughter of a Marine officer, played by John Wayne himself. An emotional scene required Temple to shed tears to send her father off to war. But the lighting was faulty, the director repeatedly requested retakes. On the 5th take, while Temple was still trembling and refining her lines, John Wayne suddenly slammed the table, screaming in the middle of the crew, "You're ruining the scene, you hear? What kind of crying is that?" The shout sounded like a bullet exploding. Temple was stunned. Her ears rang. Her eyes were panicked. I had never been yelled at like that in front of a crew, she recalled, especially by someone I had considered an idol. The set froze. No one dared to breathe. Temple walked away without a word. The shoot was cancelled. And the film, so ambitious, was never made. Years later, in a 2009 interview, Shirley recalled with a wry smile, "John Wayne wasn't a bad guy. But he should never have worked with children. That day, I wasn't a person, I was just a chair." Of the 5 people she vowed never to forgive, he was the only one named not out of malice, but because of a moment, when a child's admiration was crushed to dust. But if John Wayne was a deep cut, then the next name was a deadly one, the man whose bloody hands touched Shirley's childhood in a way no one could forgive. Fred Astaire, the gentleman with the dancing feet, the epitome of showmanship. He was a figure of elegance, straight out of Hollywood dreams. But for Shirley Temple, he was not a dream, He was a silent, cold, and destructive nightmare. In 1940, Temple was 11 years old, still a shining child star in the sky of fame. She was invited to dance with Fred Astaire for a special program. On paper, it was an honor that could not be refused. In real life, it was mental torture disguised as art. A scene less than a minute long, but Temple had to reenact it 32 times, just because her head tilt was half a beat off, her breathing was not even enough, or her heels clicked out of tune. Astaire didn't need to yell. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to look. His eyes were cold as steel, sharp as a scalpel. He didn't say anything, Temple said. He just looked at me for a second. And I felt like a speck on his stage. Each time she failed, she didn't fear punishment, she feared that look more than the whip. When rehearsal ended, Temple trudged home, her feet bleeding in her dancing shoes. But it wasn't the physical pain that made her cry, it was the question that kept repeating in her head, am I never going to be good enough? It was the first, and almost the last, time she wanted to leave the spotlight. Not for the audience, not for the role, but for a co-star who was so perfect that there was no room for human error. Fred Astaire wasn't evil, he was just too demanding of his art, but that perfection was a wound to a young soul. And while Temple's heart is still wavering between hurt and guilt, another man enters her life, not to watch silently like Astaire, but to really take action. The gentleman who gave Shirley Temple her first taste of humiliation. Clark Gable, the sex symbol of a generation, the man who made millions of hearts flutter with his classic role as Red Butler in Gone with the Wind. But for Shirley Temple, he was not a gentleman on the silver screen, but the first man in her life who made her feel humiliated to the core. That year, Shirley was only 9 years old. She was invited to a lavish party organized by MGM, a gathering place for all the elite of 1930s Hollywood. With her famous curly hair and innocent round eyes, she approached Clark Gable, politely bowing like a starlet respecting her elder. But Gable just glanced at her from head to toe with a look of contempt and indifference, then turned and walked away, without a word. As if that was a heavy enough mental slap, Shirley could clearly hear him whisper to the person next to him, "A child like this is called a star? Hollywood is really degraded." The little girl could only stand there, swallowing her tears. No one noticed the child queen crumbling inside the gorgeous chiffon dress. Shirley would never forget that moment. "He was the first person to make me feel that I didn't belong in Hollywood," she would later say. Without cooperation, without acting together, just with a contemptuous look and a cruel sentence, Clark Gable had carved his name into her heart like the first scar. He didn't hit, didn't shout, but planted in the child's soul a toxic belief, "I'm just a decoration for an adult party." And before that scar could heal, Shirley met another person, someone who not only saw her as a decoration, but also tried to turn her into a docile puppet for his desires. One was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, the other was America's curly-haired angel. Hollywood once dreamed of a pair of shining goddesses, Judy Garland and Shirley Temple, but the reality was a glittering dagger. Behind the lights, behind the fairy tale music, there was a smoldering Cold War, where sweet eyes hit sharp points. Judy Garland, a talent raised on pressure and sedatives, once whispered to a crew member, "That shaggy-haired doll is famous for her smile, not her acting." While Temple was pampered by Fox, with high salaries and beautiful roles, Garland, under the cruel hands of MGM, was forced to lose weight, bind her breasts tightly and swallow drugs to maintain her Jade Girl image. But the climax of humiliation came in 1939. At a party on the set, when someone jokingly asked, "Do you want to act in a movie with Shirley Temple?" Garland laughed in the crowd and replied, "No way. I don't play with singing dolls." The whole room laughed. Temple tried to laugh along, but inside, something had broken. "I thought it was a joke," she later said, but there was no joke in her eyes. Garland once said, "She didn't hate me, she hated that I existed." Maybe it was true. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't your enemies, they're the ones whose faces most resemble yours. Judy Garland died alone, addicted to drugs, at 47. Shirley lived to be 85, living two lives, one on stage, one in politics. And when she listed 5 people who could never be forgiven, Judy was the only one who didn't abuse, didn't insult, but betrayed. Hollywood has all kinds of women, cherished muses, celebrated stars, and daggers in evening gowns. Shirley MacLaine, no, not Temple, MacLaine, was the last, sharp, caustic, and unafraid to tear down monuments in public. And if anyone ever made Shirley Temple, the quintessential American icon, feel so small that she wanted to disappear, it was her. Though they never worked together on screen, the press for decades pitted the two Shirleys against each other. The curly-haired angel of the 1930s, the rebel queen of the 1960s. MacLaine loathed Temple's towering shadow. Asked about Temple on a talk show in 1982, she replied, to laughter, "I think people remember her more than she ever was." But the fatal blow came in 1989. An Oscar party, red wine, a glittering gown, and the impending doom. Shirley Temple approached, polite, smiling, extending a hand to the woman of her name. MacLaine glanced up and down and said something that froze the room. "Oh, I thought you were retired. What did you do?" Temple, by then a former ambassador who had stood before the United Nations, was as stunned as a child who had just been slapped in the face. "I've been yelled at by men, I've been swallowed up by Hollywood, but no one has ever made me feel invisible like she did." Shirley MacLaine didn't strike, didn't insult, she just shattered an entire legacy with a question that was as venomous as slow poison. MacLaine not only represents a rebellious generation, she is the living symbol of a new Hollywood. No need to remember, no need to respect, just bring down. Some people destroy you with words. Some with anger. And some just stand there, look at you, and you crumble. Shirley Temple stepped onto the stage at the age of 3, but it took her more than 80 years to summon the courage to name the people who destroyed her childhood. Not with fists, but with eyes, words, and cruelty wrapped in a halo. Clark Gable with the look of contempt, Judy Garland with the sinister smile, John Wayne with the scream that tear through innocence, Shirley MacLaine, the knife in the ball gown, Fred Astaire with the silence that crushes from the inside. No one brought her down in the papers. No one smeared her publicly. But they left scars so subtle that it took a lifetime to notice. Maybe we've been wrong all along. The monster in Hollywood doesn't always have claws or fists. Sometimes it comes in the form of a charming smile. Curious about how many cracks are there beneath the gilded veneer of Hollywood? Leave a comment and tell us who you think is the most shocking and who deserves to be called out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in the next video, we'll be exploring Marilyn Monroe's blacklist, a list that includes a president.